Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Today's guest is Dr. Peter Larkins, a sport and exercise physician, former Olympic middle distance runner, and one of the pioneers of sports medicine in Australia. Across his career, he's worked with elite athletes, Australian Football League clubs, national sporting teams, and major media networks, helping people understand what drives high performance, longevity, and well-being. Peter is also the author of The Healthy 100, which was awarded second place recently in the Australian Business Book Awards in 2024, where he distills decades of medical practice and athletic experience into practical, evidence-based advice for living a healthier, happier, and longer life. Today, we're exploring how busy entrepreneurs and executives can apply those principles to build a stronger health span and perform at their best for longer. Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Brad, nice to be with you. Thanks for chatting with me.
Beyond the very impressive introduction resume, perhaps you could just start by telling us, how did you come to be in this place? This is an excellent book. This is one of the books where I started and looked at it, and it was just rich with wisdom, and I'm quite fascinated as how you got to the point where you write this book beyond what the bio says.
Thanks for the words, Brad. Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's something I've always done, in terms of looking at high performance. So when I go back, I guess, to my original sort of, athletic career, athletes are always looking at things. Athletes are looking at things to what do we need to do to get right to be the best we can perform on this any given day. And my medical career has been looking after athletes in the early days, but later on, as the last 20 years, my elite athletes are between the ages of 50 and 90 these days, and they're all wanting to be keeping healthy, keeping productive. So I really looked at applying all the lessons that I'd learned literally over a few decades working with high performance sport into high performance in life. And it doesn't matter whether it's just as a parent or whether it's you're a teacher at a school or you're running, the multi-big company like you do or worldwide company, you want to be at your best. And so the book was all the principles that we need to do to be at our best. And some of those are medical clearly, but there's a lot of it comes down to mindset and psychology. So I just found that it was the sort of messages I was giving out in my everyday practice to people about how to look after themselves, not just their sore knee or their sore shoulder, which was my orthopedic background coming out, but was my health and fitness background where I was advising people about exercise and weight loss and nutrition and how much sleep they should need. It just goes on. And I thought, maybe I should start putting this down in writing. And it just sort of came on at the back of that terrible period of time in COVID, which all your listeners will be familiar with. Health, I thought, became such a focus of attention globally, not just in Australia, and how we keep healthy and why we're not looking after our health. And so I felt health was sort of a great book to write, how to keep healthy going forward.
I think what really fascinated me was having been a student of people like Dr. Peter Larkins and Andrew Huberman, and having done a very, very amateur job of trying to understand health span. I think that what really I found quite curious was the dogma or the approach generally is that there is medicine 2.0 and medicine 3.0. Medicine 2.0 is more reactionary, is more, if you're sick, we will come and fix you, given the tools at our disposal, whereas medicine 3 is a lot more preventative. And you seem to have bridged that gap through the book, but then also coupled with the focus and the mindset of elite sport and elite performance. Any reaction or response to that?
Yeah, well, you mentioned some incredible authors in there, of course, in Peter Attia, medical colleague, and Huberman, David Sinclair, also another great Aussie working out of Boston, who's been working, furiously in the last couple of decades looking at longevity and why we age. And so I was inspired. Now, that's the science, if you like, in
Yeah.
terms of looking at the technical side. Why do we slow down? Why do we age? What happens to our body when we start to decay, so-called? Some ways I was not trying to be as scientific as them, Brad. I was trying to dumb it down a little bit for the community to take it on board.
Yeah.
My book was for 15-year-olds to read or 85-year-olds to read. So and I think that's always been my sort of style when I've worked in the media. I'm not trying to talk to colleagues when I'm on air. I'm not trying to talk to fellow doctors or sports scientists or exercise physiologists. I'm talking to coaches. I'm talking to young kids. I'm talking to the general public. So again, I often wear the athlete hat when I'm dealing with people, because I remember my days at being a competitor at 8 years of age and 10 years of age, 12 years of age. And perhaps I wasn't a good listener, but I knew what I wanted to hear in those days. And so, again, when it came to health information, I was trying to, again, put the hat on as the consumer, not as the medical person preaching to them. And as I said, I was trying to make that connection between health information. And the early part of the book, of course, does talk a bit scientifically. Why do we slow down? Why do we age? Why do we start to feel like we haven't got the zip we had in our 20s and 30s? And there is science behind that. And that's mentioned by those other authors quite a bit, in particular David Sinclair. So writing that part, was the bit medical, and then the nutrition part, of course, was important. But then I started to really put on my philosopher hat, if you like, when we started to talk about mindset, because athletes, clearly there's great athletes who haven't achieved what they should have done because they haven't had the right mindset. And there've been very talented athletes who weren't at the top of the tree, who got to the top of the tree because their mindset was so good. And so when it came to lifestyle and health span, and just for the listeners, there's a difference between lifespan, which is just how long you and I are going to live. We're going to live to 90, we're going to live to 95. That's our health, that's our lifespan. But a health span is what percentage of that time will be healthy. So we might still only make it to 95, but we want to be healthy at 94 and drop off the perch. You don't want to spend the last 10 years unhealthy. So again, I was trying to make that connection about what are the other things that you need to do to have a positive attitude, which the athletes have. But of course, in real life, it was just making simple things like having friends, having challenges, setting out things to keep our cognitive ability. And so that's where the 100 ways come from. It's the healthy 100. It's 100 tips. You don't have to get all of them right, Brad. It's, as I say in the book, it's a bit like a smorgasbord. You can take your plate around and take one or two, but it was really meant to be not a medical textbook. It was meant to be a lifestyle guide.
Yeah, and a great job. Very practical and easy to read. I think at first when I read the title, I thought, oh, it's how you get to live to be 100 years of age. And then once I kind of started looking, it was, no, these are the 100 things that you've got to do. And just very, very simple and practical. So you've treated thousands of people across these decades. When you think about, I'm going to just zero in on our audience, entrepreneurs, executives, busy business people who age the best, the ones who stay sharp and energetic and high performing, maybe into their 60s, 70s, and even 80s. What do they all have in common? Is there a pattern that you see there?
Yeah, I think it's drive and energy. These people are successful for a reason. I mean, intelligence comes into it. So it's sort of, it's intelligence is a word that's thrown around, but these people have drive and energy, and I think they keep challenging themselves. It's a bit like the athletes who do well. I'm not going to talk about athletes all the time because this book's not about athletes, but there's a comparison that I'll use a few times. So when you talk about highly successful executives, and I do have quite a crop of them, in my waiting room from time to time, some pretty high profile ones, Brad. And I love chatting to these guys because, we don't talk medicine, we talk business, we talk life. They may be there because they got a sore knee from whatever they're doing with their tennis or on their boats, or these guys, right? But the issue comes down, I learn from them, they learn from me. And I think part of it is their ability to set goals, their ability to meet targets. And so when we're talking health targets, I like talking to those sort of men and women because they're used to being challenged. They're used to not saying no. If at first you don't succeed, try and try again. I learned that as a young kid at school. And I think there's people, and the fascinating thing about them, and you'll know some of them, some very famous Western Australian ones, of course, these people haven't had a charmed life by any means. These people haven't had success along the way by any means. They've all got great stories. And, and I've got some inside stories on these people going, wow. And again, the analogy coming through about high performance in sport, not every athlete wins every race. Every time you go to the Olympics, you're not going to win. Not all teams going to win every weekend. You get knockback. But would you go again? And so these people that I've found, were successful people were people that just, they weren't easily put off. And I mean, the downside of often they don't have great insight into their own personal health in some ways because they're so business focused, they're so successful, they're on the go, they're on planes, they're eating in restaurants all the time. And, I think their level of energy and their level of go sort of sometimes keeps them active, but it's not always because they have a great insight. So what I try to add to that is the ability to understand how they can be adding to their health profile, by eating well at a restaurant, knowing what to choose and making sure that they do get some exercise when they are traveling. So because, the mindset of those people is the business seems to come first, not themselves. And they're so successful because they're really good at setting the business first. But, at the end of the day, if you're not there, you know what? You're not going to be running the business at all. And so, this book is about taking responsibility for your own health, not relying on someone else to do it. And it's about educating people about what control we have over our life in terms of health. And that's the teaching message about what control do you have as an individual over your future health span.
So if I try to translate that with your blessing, it sounds like it's attitude and mindset and the ability to focus. If they can translate that into life, that's a great benefit. Or health span.
I think so. Yeah, it is. And again, the thing I learned over the years when I was looking at, the aging people around the world, because we know there are the zones in the world that are famous for having happy, healthy, older people. And, Japan and Okinawa, one of the islands in Japan, we've got Sardinia in Italy, we've got Ikaria in Greece, Costa Rica, and they're called blue zones. And there's a whole book about blue zones, which many of your listeners may have read as well. But when you look at what makes those sort of people live healthy, it's not just one component.
Yeah.
It's a multifactorial contribution. So certainly the nutrition can be good. Certainly the air quality can be good. Certainly the water quality be good. Yeah, tick, tick, tick. But the thing that really stood out when I was reading about them is they're happy, their mindset, their social connectivity. And this is where the business people, again, I guess I'm trying to put that into them, that it's not just about having a medical checkup, whether you eat this amount of protein or this amount of carbohydrate. A lot of it is to do with healthy attitude.
Yeah.
And I think those aging populations in the blue zones, it's a common theme that runs through, that they're happy in their older, healthy age groups. And part of that is the psychological component of what they do during their day.
And on that topic, in the book, you group the 100 ways or the 100 tips across 5 categories: exercise, nutrition, habits, mindset, and social, I think. Can you give us
Social connection.
Social connection, yeah. Can you give us a short definition of each? And which one do you think, to the earlier point, that these business leaders often most neglect?
Yeah, well, there are. I've sort of categorized. There are 100 ways, the 100 tips. As I said, the smorgasbord is there. You've got 100 foods to choose from. Pick which one you put on your plate. You don't have to have them all. But the 5 categories. So the first one is the role of exercise in health. So that's really my athlete and my medical hat coming on right up front. What do we know about exercise? Exercise is medicine, is a mantra that I trot out quite a lot in the book. And I keep apologizing, but I don't mean it in a negative way during the book. So there I'm mentioning exercise again because it is the connection thing.
Works.
Yeah, I mean, this works. I mean, we know, so the first part of the book, that first of the 5 categories, we're talking about what is health, why does health fail, what are the things what are the top 20 things that are going to kill Australians today? Because the Bureau of Statistics or the Institute of Health and Welfare, you can look them up. You'll know it's going to be stroke and heart disease, and it's going to be bowel cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer. They're all there. So I was just laying out the information, but talking about how exercise has a positive influence on those. So just back to the medical side of it, every day, including today, people will go to their doctor to get a pill for their cholesterol. They'll get a pill for their blood pressure. They'll get a pill for their anxiety. They'll get a pill to help them sleep. The best pill is exercise because all of those components can be treated through exercise therapy. Nutrition is the second part of those sort of 5 categories because, again, it's you are what you eat. It's about fueling your system. And again, decay within the system is often written about scientifically because of all the processed foods we have, the chemicals that are in food, all the salt and the sugars that really we weren't having in our generations earlier with the amount of processed food. So those particular metabolic processes break down our cells and our DNA and we unravel and they're unhealthy. So that was the second part. And then I talked about the habits you need to get into, what you need to do each day, the healthy habits. So it's about setting a couple of goals for yourself and adding in habits in terms of how much sleep you might get or what sort of exercise you might do. Then I put on the philosopher's hat, as I said, Brad, earlier. The last two were talking about personal challenges and mindset and that positive attitude and setting things for do and developing things like gratitude and compassion and all the things that those older people have in their life. They have that in there. And the final one was the social connection, because that's the real thing that we saw perhaps suffer a lot during the COVID time, especially in Melbourne here in Victoria, where we had the great lockdown or the great shutdown, as you know, and people were in nursing homes or elderly people. And the mental health side of that was just incredibly damaging. And again, comparing the populations around the world, the great thing they have is the social connection. I mean, there are many parts of those worlds where there's no aged care homes. They don't have nursing homes because the generations look after each other.
Yeah.
The grandparents live with their children, the children are living with their parents. And so this generational support. And as I said, social connection, again, you've got to have a reason to look. Now, whether it's a bridge club, whether it's going to a community garden, or whether it's a book club, they're all the social connection things that people need to set for them. So back to the answer to your question about where do I think perhaps that the executives don't quite get it right, I'd probably say the exercise component is not great, because they probably underestimate, not how hard you have to exercise, but how frequently and how consistently you have to exercise to maintain the healthy profile. And so that's one thing, because it doesn't matter where you are. There's going to be a gym, there's going to be a treadmill, there's going to be a river you can go walking along just for 10 minutes before dinner, etc. So that one, probably the exercise, because that's really me prescribing or exercise prescription coming in. They're usually socially connected, these people, so I don't think that's their failure. But perhaps having not having enough of the habits routinely. So the 100 habits are in there, picking out things they can add in that are just simple to put through.
So on exercise, if that was, I guess, where your gut took you or your intuition took you, is that about incidental activity, which is something that you talk about in the book, getting more movement into each day? Because you can prescribe to oneself, I'm going to do this much exercise each day, but you do talk about the importance of this incidental activity. So if you're stuck in this back-to-back meetings and screen time, can you give us an example of the importance of and why, or what the importance of incidental activity and how leaders can use that to make the biggest difference?
Yeah, it's a great point, because I think exercise can be intimidating as a word, because people think, well, that's what athletes do. They train, they exercise. So we're talking about movement is medicine, just moving around, being active, physical activity. It's been shown in all the studies on manual workers compared to sedentary workers.
Yeah.
So manual workers don't necessarily run 10K each day or go to the gym 4 times a week, but their health profile, because they're active, because they're standing, because they're moving, tends to be better than someone who sits behind a desk all day. And so incidental activity is just using an opportunity to burn a few calories or to use a few muscles. Even just standing up in a meeting, you're burning calories. We know the popularity of stand-up desks that have come in, and so that's incidental activity. Many people work in multi-story buildings, and so you've got to go up one flight in the building. I was going to say one flight of stairs. You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
And they go the elevator and they go up one flight, and there's a stairs, like 3 steps to the left, there's a stairwell. So that's incidental activity where if you only got to go up one or 2 flights, use the stairs.
Yeah.
And I always, in my seminars, I have great shots around airports where you've got the escalators and the stairs next to each other, and you have this hugely crowded escalator where people are going up or down an escalator in an airport, and a completely barren set of stairs where people could walk up and down just to get that's exercise, walking up and down. We go to the supermarket, we go to Bunnings, we go to Officeworks, we look for the car park that's absolutely the closest one to the front door we can get. Why not just park 30 or 40 metres away? There's another 100 steps. When you go to a train, you need to get a park so close to the train station. Maybe if you do get a tram or a train to work, just get off one stop early and walk a little bit. So that's incidental activity. Most people have got a great coffee shop in the bottom of their building, but there might be a great coffee shop 5 minutes up the street. So if you go up and get the coffee there and come back, there's 10 minutes of walk that you've done at your lunchtime or your mid-morning break. So that none of that's exercise in the literal sense, Brad. It's not training. It's movement. It's calories, and it's getting you out in the fresh air. So that's not enough, but that's where incidental activity can contribute to moving muscles and to burning up a few extra calories. Obviously, I do prescribe in the book, I talk about the right amount of exercise you should be doing if you want to be doing some structured exercise with the cardiac and the strength training, because that really is when you start to hit the sweet spot at reducing the risk of these illnesses that are going to knock us all off eventually.
You talk about the nutrition rainbow. It might be number 36, I think. So for leaders who are traveling, because travel is something that we often need to do more than the regular person, you press for time, you eat where you can. Is there a simple, practical way to apply this nutrition rainbow principle? And maybe you could just elaborate on what that is.
Yeah, well, the rainbow is colours, obviously, and so we're talking about what's on your plate. So we talk about the bland vanilla plate or the blonde plate, right? So you're looking
Yeah.
at it as a white plate, and it's got some protein on it. And it might have potato, and it might have something else that's just white, and it doesn't have the rainbow colours. It doesn't have the carrot. It doesn't have the broccoli. It doesn't have the beans or the peas or the green or the pumpkin. So the whole idea is you're mixing up those nutrient-rich vegetables, because vegetables and fruit obviously are both colourful. So we're looking at the plate being like a 2/3, 1/3 split. So 2/3 of your plate should be the non-protein food, and that's generally going to be the salad, or it's going to be the vegetables. So you can actually get sides of vegetables when you go to a restaurant. You can ask for not to have the heavy dressings put on the salad and dress it yourself. So these guys are busy. They're on planes, as I said, they're in restaurants, these girls as well, of course. And so it's about food choices that you make, and having the colour on the plate, and trying to get at least 2 or 3 colours. And that's the concept of the rainbow foods, because rather than having as I said, the vanilla coloured plate, which tends to be starchy carbohydrate foods, like potato and rice and the unprocessed carbohydrates, or the processed carbohydrates, I mean, which are the white rice and white pasta and things like that. So we want the unprocessed or the whole grain ones, which again got a bit of colour, but it's really having the vegetable colour or the salad colour. So you got your cucumber, you got your tomato, you've got your, as I said, your peas, and you've got your lettuce, those sort of side of things where the colour comes in as 2/3 of the component of the plate. And, when you get them on the plane, you just try to eat the vegetables first, or eat those things first to fill you up, rather than going straight for the piece of steak, or straight for the whatever other protein comes on the food.
Yeah, I have a philosophy which is always only order the salad on a plane. It's pretty much the right meal. It's not too filling given the flight, because being in Perth, everywhere's a long way. There are no short flights generally. Yeah, go the salad, go the vegetables.
Yeah, look, again, travelling within Australia, it's pretty rare that you need to have much of a heavy meal on any flights in Australia, really. I mean, even coast to coast flights that you just referred to, because we're talking 3 or 4 hours. I get that, but honestly, plain food isn't notorious for being the most nutritious. It's obviously pre-prepared food, so you're better off to get a salad or a snack at the airport, or wait till you get to it, and just as I said, maybe eat the salad or eat the veg if it is a hot meal. Certainly on the Perth to the East Coast sort of flights. But I'm more talking about restaurant food for these guys as well, because there's a lot of rich food, a lot of rich sauces served, and if you're a high end exec, you're often going to a very important function. Even I get to go to them, and you really sort of pick the eyes out a little bit of what the foods you get. I'm not a dessert eater; that's just my preference. So I tend not to eat dessert, even when you're getting meals served in those corporate events and fundraisers and charity fundraisers that we all go to. Selective about not having the desserts at the end. But in the restaurants, as I said, you can ask for the sauce on the side for the steak or the chicken, and you can ask for the dressing on the side. And that's a way of just learning to a little bit. And again, just to back off a little bit, Brad, I'm not talking about being an evangelist here. I'm not talking about 7 days a week trying to be holy. I'm not a soapbox sort of person. I mean, I enjoy a glass of wine, but I'm talking if you can get it right most of the time, so 4 to 5 days a week, then you're certainly going to be investing in your health. You don't have to be an angel, or, as I said, I'm not being an evangelist. I'm saying you have to eat every day perfectly. But if you're exercising, you can get away with your treat days. I mean, that's, people say, I saw an athlete eating pizza or a burger. Well, guess what? He's out there running 10K tomorrow morning, burning it up. Don't criticize him, right? Unless you're doing that, you're not going to get away with eating that pizza.
You speak about wine, and I think one of the tips is wine. It's, and I'm going to misrepresent it, but have a glass of wine. There's a lot of conflicting advice around alcohol. I think some people are arguing strongly for complete elimination.
Yeah.
And you're saying that there are benefits of an occasional glass of red wine in particular. Any reaction to that? I
Yeah.
don't come with an opinion necessarily.
Well, I think there are two favourite chapters of my mates in the book. Chapter 94, they go to first of all the value of wine. So they think that they wouldn't have respected my book if I didn't write about wine, given that I tend to be a practitioner of it. And I think that the chapter on Belgian chocolate is a favourite with my female friends, and the chapter on wine with my mates. But you're right, it is confusing because you get these stories that you should have no alcohol, or that alcohol's bad, or you shouldn't, or you shouldn't. And I really looked at the research pretty heavily. There's a whole chapter on it, literally, the history of wine, and red wine particularly, looking at whether or not there were some good studies, and I'm talking really good studies, looking at the antioxidant and the anti-aging benefits of certain grapes. And it's certain grapes. It's not every wine. I mean, white wine and champagne does not have the same health benefits as red wine. Not all red wines are the same. I learned that Pinot Noir is the healthiest of all the red grapes in the world because it's the hardest to grow. It's the most stressed grape. It is a cool climate wine because it has to survive. So it actually has its own defense mechanisms where it's got the highest concentration of antioxidants. And David Sinclair's all over this resveratrol, which is one of the anti-aging chemicals that you can even get as a supplement these days from a health food store or buy it online. But resveratrol is one of the chemicals inside the red wine that provides that same antioxidant and anti-aging. But it's highest in Pinot Noir, then it's Shiraz. And back to the blue zone. So the Sardinian men is where, so you want a bit of an Italian Sardinian heritage in your bloodlines, Brad, if you can, because that's where and they have a Grenache that they grow in Sardinia, and they're drinking it at 10 o'clock in the morning when they're playing bocce, these guys, right? So there's a limit. And I talk about everything in moderation, including moderation in the book. But the evidence on balance is that 1 or 2 glasses of wine, not 7 days a week, but, with food. And I'm not saying white wine shouldn't be drunk at all, but it's all about the balance with it there. But the red wine medical evidence is stronger than saying you shouldn't have any. And now there are some people that can't drink it, and I'm not advocating alcohol at all in this book. I'm just saying here's the explanation about red wine, why it's controversial, and this is what I think is the best evidence for it. But you choose, because I'm very conscious that a lot of people don't want to drink. But if you're looking at Margaret River over your way, for goodness sake, you guys are putting out some beautiful stuff out of Margaret River over there. So there's a market for good Pinot and good Shiraz and a bit of Cabernet.
I think that's the thing that generally the average person might struggle with. How do I not become Brian Johnson? Brian Johnson, for context, the person who has basically dedicated his body to science to see how he can live with the youngest body possible for as long as possible. And maybe I've misrepresented that. How do I not become like Brian Johnson, where my whole day is taken up with military style application of health? But at the other end, not do enough that I'm really going to not have a strong and good health span. I think that's the thing that people kind of struggle with.
Yeah, well, I think the extremism is something we're completely avoiding.
Yeah.
That type of is it probably a personal research study, if for want of a better word, to try and just see how many supplements you can take and how what effect it's going to have. But this is where I talk about balance. I don't, people talk about work-life harmony. I talk about work-life balance in the book quite a bit because I prefer balance, because you can have your work and your outside life both going badly and they're in balance. But I don't like this work-life balance term because they're both badly contributing. So I look at the harmony where they help each other along the way. And so it comes down to this sort of sweet spot about how much you need to do. And there's been studies, literally since the 1950s and 1960s about how little you have to do, not how much you have to do, but how little you have to do to get the benefits. And just going from nothing. So if you're a sedentary person who doesn't walk the dog and doesn't walk around the block, and you literally go to work and come home and go to work and come home, and you go from doing that to doing 60 minutes per week, Brad, per week, not per day, you reduce the all-cause mortality risk. So all-cause mortality is diabetes, stroke, heart disease, cancer risk. You reduce that by 25% just by doing 60 minutes a week of accumulative exercise, not extreme.
Yeah.
Now, there's no pill in the world that reduces all-cause mortality by 25%. That study's been going through Harvard Medical School for a long time. Now, the sweet spot to get up to the 40% reduction is this magical number of 150 minutes a week that gets talked about all the time, 30 minutes 5 times a day, so 5 times a week rather. So 150 minutes of accumulative cardiac exercise takes you from the 25 to the 40%. That's a really drastic reduction of all-cause mortality.
Yeah.
But you don't start at it having to do 150 minutes a week. You might start at 5 minutes every second day. You're only doing 15 minutes this week, but then 5 minutes becomes 10 minutes, and suddenly you're doing 30 minutes a week. Then you've hit the 60 minutes, and suddenly over a few weeks you start contributing. You're burning a few calories. You're getting out there, meeting the neighbours and looking at the garden, and you start to feel better about yourself. And so I think what people need to realise, it's not training for the next Olympics. It's not trying to make people into world champions. We're not trying to have extreme versions, but if you had the cardio and then you look at the value of strength training. So when I was an athlete, strength training was about big muscles, the
Yeah.
bodybuilders, the guys, the gym junkies, we called them in the 1970s. But the thing that's really impressed me with all the research in the last decade about why we should lift some weights and strength training are the metabolic benefits way beyond muscle. And what I mean by metabolic benefits are blood sugar control for diabetes, cholesterol control, cancer reduction and risk, let alone, things like falls and stability where you might break your hip as you get older, right? So strength training is not just about muscles. It actually gives you extra metabolic benefits. So we're looking at 2 or 3 sessions a week of the major muscle groups to contribute for more mortality reduction, the same as cardio does. So there's your mixture. I talk about the 3 S's. There's sweat, which is the cardio or aerobic or whatever you want to call it, getting out there and doing some cardio, whether it's bike riding, whether it's treadmill, whether it's rowing machine, the body can't tell the difference. So the second S is strength, which is resistance training or weight training or strength training. They're all the same, those 3. Third S is stretching, because we all get a bit tighter and more stiff in our lower back over time. So whether you're a Pilates person or a yoga person. So when I talk in the book about the 3 components of exercise, the 3 S's. You got to sweat a little bit, you got to do some strength work, you got to do a bit of stretching. Now, in terms of scientific evidence, the aerobic and the cardio's got the strongest benefits.
Yeah.
That's the S benefit. But strength, as I said, has really, really come on in the last 10 years. And so strength training, not just to look big, but to give you muscle tone and to improve things like metabolic health with cholesterol and diabetes, has been a really revolutionary sort of advance in saying why we need to go to the gym. Or lift weights at home, just using some body weight and some therapy band.
You mentioned aerobic performance. What do you think would be, if there was only one, the single metric that would be the best signal of health span performance? I've heard it mentioned before that VO2 max might be. Do you have an opinion on what is the single metric that would give you the best chance of health span, or am I trying to apply a business perspective in a way I shouldn't?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you, because I think that's oversimplifying it. And in fact, it's overcomplicating it in the same sentence, because how many people are going to get their VO2 max measured to know whether they're on track? I mean, that's an athlete's. Now you're bringing the science into it. And I think that's where I've tried not to be, rather than saying, you need to know your VO2 max. So VO2 max, folks, is how much oxygen you're capable of using when you're out doing cardio. So that the high performance endurance athletes, the cross-country skiers, the marathon runners, the triathletes, they've got huge VO2 maxes, 75, 80, 85. A sedentary person might have a VO2 max of 20 to 30. So, that on its own isn't the metric that I would be using. I mean, I think there's no single one. I mean, a lot of it is just looking at, your body weight, looking at your energy levels and your sleep quality, because they're the things that all come down to see whether you're keeping your body weight in a healthy body weight. One of the things that motivated me to write the book, just to back up a little bit, Brad, there were 3 things. One, the challenge, because I needed a challenge. I thought, I'm going to write a book about all the things I'm talking about. The other thing, I got sick of hearing how Australia was going through a health crisis. we don't score well internationally.
Yeah.
We have this great reputation for being a sporting nation. The Aussies, our cricket team, our football, our swimming team at the Olympics, our running. And yet we were scoring really badly on a global health scale, and that really annoyed me. And the third thing, I probably, every time I picked up a weekend magazine, there'd be a story on sugar. Should we have sugar? Shouldn't we have sugar? Should we drink coffee? Should we not drink coffee? The red wine we brought up before.
Yeah.
And sometimes they were written by personal trainers or health gurus, but who didn't necessarily have a medical background training. And I sort of thought, I know all that. I mean, I may not be a scientist when it comes to diabetes, and I'm not a sleep medicine expert, but but I have all that information. So that was the third wing of the motivation, if you like to say. I'm going to put all that together. I'm going to put a book, with 100 ways, and I'm going to talk about sleep, and I'm going to talk about sugar. I'm going to talk about not only about coffee, but I'm talking about coffee with or without caffeine, because there's a caffeine story and there's a coffee story, and there's the
Yeah.
red wine story and the chocolate story. So it was all about blending together those sort of things, I suppose, that got me motivated, again, with the interest of, I want Australia to be healthy. I want us to get away from that concept of being obese or being overweight, and
Yeah.
especially in our kids, Brad. We are now catching up to the Americans at a terrible rate because of the fast food industries, because of the lack of home cooking skills that kids are getting these days with busy parents. And so our processed food and our takeaway food has
Mm.
led to poor nutrition skills in kids, but it's also led to obesity. And then couple that with the lack of physical activity that occurs in schools. I don't know what it's like in Perth these days, but certainly primary school levels here in Victoria, there's this liability concern where teachers don't want us to supervise physical activity in case someone hurts themselves and they get sued. So the kids spend their break time on screens. I mean, that's not an S. A screen
No.
isn't one of my S's, right? It's sweat, strength, and stretch. There's no screen in the S's there.
Yeah.
So, they're the sort of things that I think that there's no single metric. Sort of comes down to different things for different people.
You mentioned sleep, then another S. Sleep, I don't want to sound like I'm too old, but when I was young, there was a perspective which is sleep is for later on. And now I think that people's general perspective has changed a lot, and just the importance of, for certainly the average person that I interact with, has changed remarkably. So what's the minimum effective sleep routine that you recommend so that it doesn't affect a performance, or so that someone can live optimally?
Yeah, now obviously there's an average range, and so
Yeah.
people listening to this are going to say, "Well, I've always needed a lot less sleep than my mates," and other ones will say, "Oh, I sleep heavily." So I'm going to talk about ranges of sleep, because we know from all the sleep studies of teenagers and sleep studies around Australia and worldwide that the average person is getting 7 to 8 hours,
Yep.
average. Athletes actually tend to get a bit more. So if you look at Olympic athletes and you look at the people that run in elite sports, they tend to do a bit more. And just to go back a little bit, sleep is recovery. So there's a lot of hormonal changes, a lot of things are recovering. It's not just about getting ready for tomorrow. There's a lot of metabolic processes with growth hormone and other hormone balances with cortisol that happen. So look, I know a surgeon who gets 4 hours of sleep per night, and he reckons he's done it for 25 years. And now he's in
Wow.
his 60s. And I'm thinking that cannot be good for you. So sleep is recovery. Sleep is important. It's been studied and studied and studied. It's been shown that, it is one of the things we have in our sort of 24-hour cycle is to refresh and be ready. And so babies sleep a lot. Older people tend to sleep a lot. Where you are in the middle, if you're in that sort of, I used to be a 6 hours a week sleep. I sleep 6 hours a night sleeper. And, yes, I'm older, but I've also appreciated the value of it. So I'm much closer to an 8-hour person now in terms of sleep per night.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's got their own individual. So the sleep environment's really important too. I sleep in the book I talk about sleep hygiene, whether you've got a hot room or a cold room, whether you've got, whether it's dark or whether it's light, what time you go to sleep. So that all adds to the quality of the sleep, because there's sleep and there's sleep. And what I mean
Mm.
by that is you can 8 hours of really restless sleep and you feel wretched when you wake up, and you can just literally go out and have the most peaceful 6 or 7 hours and feel like you want to take on the world. So again, I talk about the phases of sleep and how they're important as well and how they vary. So the answer is that 7 to 8 hours is the sweet spot. A little bit more for athletes, perhaps less for some people that are just that's the way their body works. But as you get older, you tend to sleep a bit more, and I think you've sort of said that about yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And certainly acting on it proactively and doing the things that I've been doing myself, I've seen a remarkable and positive difference, both in the depth of sleep. I've been measuring it myself since 2016, so I have data to see,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just how I feel the next day. So it matters a lot, I think.
Yeah, well, it is recovery. I mean, in the world of sport, we've talked about for a lot how hard athletes should train, how often they should train, what intensity of their heart rate. You mentioned VO2 max, but one of the real things that the best athletes have learned is how much recovery they need before that, so they can train again. So recovery, whether it's an ice bath, whether it's stretching, whether it's nutrition that they have in those first 60 or 90 minutes after you train when your muscles are screaming out to replenish energy. So these strategies of how to be ready for the next day, then ready for the next day, and ready for the next day, sleep becomes a critical part of that.
Yeah.
And so all the scientific studies, the AIS was studying this back in the 90s, Australian Institute of Sport in Canberra, AIS, looking at sleep requirements. And so it's not whether I can train harder, it's can I recover better? And that's
Yeah.
one of the things that happen. But again, just in terms of high performance in life, it's the same about if you're fatigued, if you're traveling, if you're going through time zones, late night meetings, ruminating in your head about the business deal or the thing, eventually that will catch up with you. Sleep deprivation can lead to low performance cognitively. And that's really why we're saying the importance of sleep and sleep environment, the sleep hygiene part being really important.
One of the things that we ask every guest is, what is a book that you would recommend for our audience? Because I think a good recommendation makes a big difference. And before I ask you that, I kind of already did, but before I do, this is an excellent book that I recommend. And I don't think the audience have ever heard me say that before in that sense. So this episode's coming out in the early part of December. It's the kind of thing that would make a good Christmas present because it's so accessible, I think. It's not a scientific or a specialist book. Now, having said all of that, what's a book that you might recommend for our audience that isn't your book or my book?
Well, in terms of just successful living or attitude to life, I really like Jim Collins' book Good to Great, which I really came across about 2007. It's been around for 25 years nearly, this book. And I came across it because my own football club was going through a pretty tough time over here in Victoria, and they were a very good club that weren't succeeding, and they became a great club and won a premiership within a year. And the CEO at the time, who was an ex-Perth fellow, by the way, really had picked up on this book and looked at the principles of setting targets for yourself, organising yourself, so the Good to Great, Jim Collins, is a good book. But I'm going to throw a second one in too, which I quite like when I was doing my research about healthy living and about attitude to life. And it's called Ikigai, spelled Ikigai, Ikigai. And it's about the Japanese philosophy about enjoying life and looking forward to life and having a reason to get up in the morning. That's what it literally translates to, as I'm told. And so Ikigai is a great sort of book to read. It's not meant to be medical, but it's an attitudinal book, as is Good to Great, which is really a book about setting targets, going ahead and challenging yourself to improve. If you think you're good, okay, but why not be great? And that's, again, the title says it all.
Quite possibly that person who utilised that book, Good to Great, could use that book and provide it to my football team over here in Perth, the Eagles, because they could do with a little bit of help perhaps. But enough about that. How can people learn more about you and your business?
Well, like all people, I have a website in my own name, drpeterlarkins.com. It's not about my medical practice. So my life these days has got medical practice and it's got the corporate life. So the corporate life is really about that I have a speaking business trying to teach people how to be most productive in their life. It doesn't matter if it's a small company, big company. So drpeterlarkins.com is a website that explains my life away from my orthopedic life. My orthopedic life is looking after the sore knees and the sore shoulders and as I said, my athletes are 50 plus these days, but they all play golf and they got a boat and they walk their dog and they want to be going off to Wimbledon or the Super Bowl. So, but the website really talks about the healthy living principles, and there's little bits up there, and it talks about how you can order the book through the website. So drpeterlarkins.com, it sort of is a little encapsulates where I am now in 2025, Brad.
Thank you. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Is there anything that we haven't discussed today that you wanted to cover off?
No, I think you've been really thorough, and thank you for having looked at the book beforehand. It's nice when someone's got some insight. So, look, my message is really, I've got through a phase where my real goal in the next 10 years is to try to teach people how to be responsible for their own health. As I said, there are so many simple things we can do, like eating well and doing some exercise and having some friends and getting some good sleep. They're the things that make us more productive. And it doesn't matter, as I said, whether you're just running a single person business or you're running a conglomerate of multinational companies. Being productive yourself means you're at work, so you're not sick, so exercise improves our immunity, but you just feel better about what you're doing. And I think that's my sort of legacy for the next 10 years is to make Australia healthier. I'm hoping you'd mentioned Christmas before. This is not a book necessarily for older people, that anyone can read it.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping if you're inspired, give it to your kids to read as well about how to eat well and how to exercise a bit.
Fabulous. Dr. Peter Larkins, the book is The Healthy 100 Ways to a Healthier, Happier and Longer Life. We'll put the link to that in the show notes. Dr. Peter Larkins, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. It's been a great conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks, Brad. I've really enjoyed chatting with you too. Thanks a lot.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.